was dark, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound filling the quiet. A mother sat at the kitchen table, her head resting in her hands as she stared down at a stack of bills. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, and the future seemed uncertain. In her mind, she replayed the countless struggles she had endured since her divorce. The lonely nights, the overwhelming tasks of raising her children alone, and the constant battle to make ends meet. Despite all the effort she poured into her, work, and her family, it never felt like enough. Every day was a challenge, and some days she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. But as fate would have it, this wasn't just any ordinary day. There was something in the air that felt different, a shift, though she couldn't quite place it. It was the kind of feeling you get right before something life-changing happens, and little did she know her life was about to be touched in a way she never could have imagined. Enter Barron Trump. Yes, you read that right. The son of former President Donald Trump, known to the world as a figure who has mostly stayed out of the limelight. But what if I told you that this young man, just a teenager at the time, was about to change her life forever? And no, it wasn't some kind of grand gesture or a flashy public appearance. It wasn't about money or fame or anything that would traditionally make headlines. It was something much more personal, something more profound. For this single mom, like so many others, the days felt long and filled with relentless struggle. She woke up early, worked late, and barely had time to breathe, let alone think about herself. But despite all the hardships, she never gave up. She fought for her kids, for her family, and for her own dignity. But in the depths of her exhaustion, she started to wonder if she was fighting a battle she could never win. Could she ever truly escape the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck? Would she ever have a moment where she could just breathe and say, "I did it"? That's when Barron Trump stepped in, though not in the way you might think. It wasn't about political connections or media exposure. It was an act that would go unnoticed by most, but to her, it meant the world. And it was something that would not only change her life, but also send ripples through the lives of many others facing similar challenges. You might be wondering, how could someone so seemingly removed from the struggles of everyday people have any impact on a single mother's life? Well, sometimes it's not about money or power. Sometimes it's about empathy. It's about understanding the hardships others face and quietly offering help when it's needed most. This story, my friends, is about that very thing. It's about the small, almost invisible ways in which kindness can transform lives, even in the most unexpected circumstances. But here's the twist. This wasn't an isolated incident. Barron's actions that day would set in motion a series of events that would alter not only this mother's future, but also inspire countless others who were quietly struggling. And as we dive deeper into the story, you'll learn exactly what happened, how it all unfolded, and why it left everyone, including this mom, speechless. So stick with me, because the next part of this journey is just as unexpected as it is heartwarming. How did a simple, unassuming act from a young man who had every reason to stay out of the spotlight change everything? And what came next in this woman's life as she discovered that sometimes the universe has a way of sending help when you least expect it? You won't believe the twists and turns this story takes. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is about to begin. And trust me, it's going to leave you on the edge of your seat. As we continue, let me take you back a bit further. You see, the woman I'm talking about wasn't always in this place of uncertainty. Her name is Sarah, and for most of her life, she had always been a fighter. Growing up in a small town, she had learned early on that nothing would come easy. Her family didn't have much, but they had enough love and determination to keep going. She worked hard in school, excelled in her studies, and dreamed of a future that was bigger than her circumstances. But life, as it often does, threw curveballs her way. After years of hard work, she found herself in a marriage that she thought was built on trust and love. When her daughter Lily was born, Sarah believed she had everything she needed to make her dreams come true. But as time went on, her marriage began to unravel. Her ex-husband, once a supportive partner, became distant, and their relationship slowly deteriorated. When he left, it wasn't just the loss of a partner, it was the weight of an entire life that she had built. She was suddenly thrust into the role of both mom and dad, and it was overwhelming. Sarah didn't just lose a partner. She lost her sense of security, her ability to rely on anyone else. She found herself navigating the world of single motherhood with no roadmap. And as she juggled raising Lily and trying to make ends meet, the bills started piling up. The weight of it all felt suffocating. Sarah would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she would make it through the next month, let alone the next year. The pressure was relentless. She would go days without sleeping properly, always running on empty, always pushing forward. But then came Barron Trump, quietly, in the background, in a way no one could have predicted. Sarah had never been someone who followed the lives of politicians or their families. She didn't care for the media circus that surrounded people like Barron, who, at that time, was just a teenager trying to live his life away from the spotlight. But life has a funny way of throwing people together, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. It was during a volunteer event at a local community center that their paths crossed for the first time. Barron, despite his fame and fortune, was there with his mother, Melania Trump, giving his time to help the less fortunate. He was quiet, observant, not the kind of person to seek attention, but when he noticed Sarah struggling with a project, he quietly stepped in to help. Sarah had no idea who he was at first. To her, he was just a young man with a kind smile who offered to take some of the burden off her shoulders. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't parade his help around for the cameras. He simply offered his hand and made the work easier. Sarah, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude, tried to refuse, but Barron insisted. It wasn't just the act of helping that struck Sarah, but the genuine way he did it. He wasn't doing it for publicity or to be praised. He was doing it because he could see the exhaustion in her eyes and understood, in his quiet way, the struggle she was facing. Later, when Sarah found out who he was, she was floored. She had heard of Barron Trump, of course, but had never imagined he would be the kind of person to get involved in the community in such a personal, hands-on way. It was as though a weight had been lifted from her, not because of who he was, but because of the kindness he showed. He didn't owe her anything, but he still reached out. And that small gesture, that one act of compassion, changed everything. But the real turning point came soon after. Barron kept in touch with Sarah. He would check in, offering help or just asking how she was doing. It wasn't something that felt forced or scripted. It felt like genuine concern from someone who had no reason to care. And as their friendship grew, Sarah began to see Barron in a different light. He wasn't the privileged son of a former president. He was a young man who understood struggle, who had the emotional intelligence to see beyond his own world. It was during one of these conversations that Barron opened up in a way Sarah didn't expect. He shared how, despite everything he too had felt isolated in his own life. The weight of being in the public eye, the expectations placed on him, the pressure to constantly be someone he wasn't. It was a struggle he knew well. But where most would crumble under that pressure, Barron took a different path. He chose to help others who were silently suffering, just like Sarah. It was then that Sarah realized that Barron Trump wasn't just a young man with privilege. He was someone who understood the value of kindness in a world that often seemed to lack it. And that realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Her life, as difficult as it had been transformed by a simple act of empathy. But this was just the beginning. As Sarah and Barron's friendship continued to grow, it became clear that something bigger was unfolding. Sarah's life, which had been filled with hardship, was starting to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her financial struggles, her worries about the future, and her uncertainty about what came next. Suddenly, they didn't seem so insurmountable. But what Barron did next would take everything to a new level. Sarah had no idea that Barron's involvement in her life was about to go much deeper. What he did would not only alter her future, but also spark a series of events that would change the lives of others who had been living in the shadows of their own struggles. And it was all leading to something that would leave Sarah in utter disbelief. But that, my friends, is a story for the next part. Stay tuned, because just when you think you know what's coming, the story takes another unexpected turn. The turning point in Sarah's life came unexpectedly, as these things often do. Barron, through his quiet gestures, had helped her in ways she never imagined. But there was one last act, something that would completely change the course of her future. It all started with an email from an organization she had never heard of before. It was a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers who were struggling, offering financial help, education, and resources to get back on their feet. And it had come out of nowhere. When Sarah first saw the email, she thought it was a mistake, or maybe even some kind of scam. But as she read through it, she realized something extraordinary. This foundation wanted to sponsor her. Not just a small grant, but a full scholarship, financial assistance to clear her debts, and a comprehensive program to help her get back on track. At first, she couldn't believe it. She'd spent years working multiple jobs, scraping by, always, just a step away from disaster. And now, in one email, everything was about to change. The shock was overwhelming. She didn't understand how she'd been chosen. There were thousands of women in her position, all fighting for their families, all facing the same hardships. Why her? But as she read through the letter again, something clicked. The foundation had heard about her situation from none other than Barron Trump himself. Apparently, after they had started to form a friendship, he had quietly taken it upon himself to recommend Sarah to the organization, knowing firsthand the kind of strength and resilience she had. He believed in her, in a way that no one had before. Barron had used his platform, his connections, to make sure Sarah would have the chance she so desperately needed. And just like that, Sarah's world shifted. With this new support, she no longer had to wake up every morning in fear of the bills stacking up, or of not being able to give her daughter the life she dreamed of. She could finally breathe. But even more than the financial relief, the true transformation came in the form of a new perspective. Sarah had spent so much of her life just trying to survive, just getting through one day at a time. But now she saw a future unfolding before her, one where she could thrive, not just survive. It wasn't about the money, though that certainly helped. It was about the belief that someone, even someone she didn't know well, had seen her struggle and chosen to help her rise above it. The gratitude she felt was beyond words. It wasn't just Barron's help that changed her life, but his reminder that we are all connected in ways we sometimes don't see. He didn't do it for recognition or gain. He did it because he understood the value of lifting others up when they were down. And that realization became the foundation of Sarah's new journey. But the story doesn't end there. The ripple effect of Barron's act of kindness didn't just change Sarah's life. It sparked something much larger. As Sarah began to flourish in her new circumstances, she found herself more motivated than ever to help others who were struggling like she had. She became involved in community work, helping other single mothers find their footing. And it all started with the reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to change the course of your life. Barron had done that for her, and now she was paying it forward. Looking back, Sarah could hardly believe how far she had come. The woman who had once doubted if she would ever escape the cycle of struggle was now standing tall, living a life she could be proud of. She knew there would still be hard days ahead, but she also knew that with the support of others and the power of kindness, she could face anything. Barron's quiet, simple act of empathy had not only changed her life, but it had created a ripple that spread far beyond what either of them could have imagined. It was a reminder that in a world filled with noise and chaos, the most powerful changes often come from the simplest acts of kindness. And as Sarah looked at her daughter, Lily, who was now thriving in ways she hadn't thought possible, she knew one thing for certain. No matter how difficult life got, there was always hope, always a chance for change, and always someone out there who cared enough to make a difference. And so, as the days moved forward, Sarah's story continued to unfold. One filled with promise, with gratitude, and with a newfound belief in the power of connection. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And all of it had started with a young man, far removed from her world, who saw her for who she was and chose to make a difference. Barron Trump's quiet act of kindness had done more than change Sarah's life. It had reminded us all that we are never truly alone in our struggles. Sometimes, the help we need is just a little bit closer than we think. So the next time you find yourself feeling like the world is against you, remember Sarah's story. Because sometimes, just one act of kindness, no matter how small, can be the spark that changes everything.